Bonjour à tous. Hi everyone, welcome to the second talk of the day. Quick reminder, you can go up to the village, kind of CTF in a Himbit village, so don't hesitate. Dmitry, you're up.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone. It's great to be here. And I'm going to be talking about logging, which, as everybody knows, it's the most exciting topic in cybersecurity. I think I see some people nodding off already. So some housekeeping items. If you want to discuss, if we run out of time and you want to discuss something, I'll hang around outside the door for a bit. And this is the QR code for the slides. You can just get them off my GitHub. So the mandatory About Me slide. These are my handles on Discord and Twitter if you want to keep in touch. My LinkedIn. I do security research at a company called Vector AI. We do threat hunting, event monitoring in the cloud and on-prem environments, and we do it using artificial intelligence and machine learning. Before that, I was a pen tester and secure software development advocate at IBM. And I came to that from a long, long time of doing software development. So that's my background. Before we go on, just a quick public service announcement. I'm part of a group called CyberSci. We create this national cybersecurity competition for university students. It's been very popular. We have regional events that culminate in a national competition, and winners actually come together to be Team Canada, that represents Canada at international CTFs, essentially. And then they've been doing pretty good. They've competed in a number of locations internationally. They even beat US and Israel at a recent European competition, so not too shabby. And the reason I'm telling you this is that we're always looking for new people to help in various capacities. If you're an employer and you're looking for bright students, one of the best ways to look for that is at security competitions, because those are students that are truly passionate about cybersecurity. So you can become a sponsor, and you can get to interview the winners of these competitions to be your employees. And we had a lot of success with that. A lot of students got jobs through that. If you're interested in actually organizing these events, we're always looking for help on our management team. And if you're a student at a university, you can actually participate. Like, just find the team that's at your university. If you don't have a team, organize one. We'll be happy to have you. And this is the contact information if you're interested. So now that we're done with that, why this talk? I do security research currently in the cloud environment, specifically in Azure infrastructure, more specifically in Azure AD and Microsoft 365. I've been doing it for a number of years, which means for a number of years I've been staring at Microsoft logs. And in the course of doing that, I've seen a number of issues that I think are not just mere inconveniences, but are things that actually complicate defense, complicate incident response. And that's what I was going to talk about. Not an Azure bashing talk. I fully imagine some of these issues actually exist in other cloud providers. This is just something we all need to be aware of. And I want to accomplish two things. So first of all, raise awareness of these issues for both defenders and red teamers, because it could be used either way. And my bigger hope is that Microsoft starts paying attention and actually fixes some of these things. And you know, these opinions are my own. Don't hold my employer responsible anyway. So we'll do a very quick Azure AD and Microsoft 365 refresher. I'll talk about how Azure does logging a little bit. Then we'll discuss how logging actually differs in on-prem versus cloud environments and why that's important. And the bulk of the talk will actually be about specific problems. And then we'll wrap up. So Azure, most of you know, one of the big three cloud providers, about a quarter of market share. I would say it's number 2, roughly, behind AWS. Has an insane number of services, like over 200 by the current count. So it's impossible actually to talk about all of the logging inside all of the Azure. So we'll just pick 2 parts of it, which I think are significant. Azure AD is one, which it's now called Entra ID, which is, I just hate that name. I'll not repeat it. It's different from Active Directory if you're used to on-prem Active Directory. But the intent is sort of the same. It's the identity provider that does authentication and authorization services in this environment. So if you want to do anything in Azure, you have to go through Azure AD. And it's of course, it's pretty well used, like 500 million users, and it's growing. Microsoft 365, also a familiar name. Most of you have used Office. Maybe some of you are, actually by a show of hands, how many of you are actually using Microsoft 365 in your school or, okay, all right, so this is very, very relevant. You guys know what Microsoft 365 is. Probably the best known SaaS provider in the Azure ecosystem. Essentially cloud-based Office plus a whole bunch of other things. So it's Exchange, Skype, SharePoint, you name it. And lots of probably will reach 500 million users soon. The interesting point is that most of their users are actually small businesses, which kind of raises the stakes a little bit because not everyone has a lot of resources to invest in dealing with problems in these environments. So these are the two that I'll be talking about. And just to kind of visualize it, if you imagine this as a kind of whole Azure infrastructure, there's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Azure AD is the identity piece, and Office 365 is the SaaS offering. So event monitoring in Azure is based on essentially on logs generated by services. There's Microsoft Sentinel, which is their native CM solution. It takes in logs from both Azure and actually can take logs from external services. There are a bunch of detections that are already defined in there. You can define your own. There's also Azure Analytics, Azure Log Analytics, which is their log analysis platform where you can do ad hoc log analysis. You can just jump into it, and using Kusto, which is actually a great log query language that they implemented and they share with Microsoft Sentinel, you can just run queries, which are sort of SQL-like queries, over the available logs and find patterns, investigate incidents. It's great. It's very powerful, and what's even more important, it's fast. The logs are stored in such a way that the queries run pretty quickly, which is awesome. And logs can be analyzed there. You can stream them into your external CM that you have. You have some choices. And there are also third-party solutions out there, my company being one, that can help you monitor and interpret logs. So that's all and good. The problem is that the only source of logs is Microsoft. Microsoft is the only one that actually generates them in Azure environment. And we will see how that becomes a problem later on. So I mentioned the two different services that we're going to talk about. For Azure AD, there are sign-in logs, and there are multiple flavors of those available. There's a directory audits log where all kinds of changes to your environment are logged. This is consumed through something called Graph API. Currently, kind of, I guess, the publicly recommended version is version 1.0, but I see Microsoft products actually using a beta version all the time. So it's a little confusing whether they want us to switch to beta version or it's too early. Microsoft 365 generates its own logs, and it's done through a completely different interface. There's this legacy management activity API. They have separate logs for different types of events, Exchange, SharePoint, general, it's kind of all encompassing, and there's a special log called Azure Active Directory, which sort of has similar events to what you see in Azure AD logs. And you'll see some examples of why it may be useful to have that duplication. I think they're going to migrate to Graph API eventually, but you can never tell with Microsoft. So logging in on-prem environments and in the cloud is different. So those of you who have worked in on-prem environments, for all the faults of on-prem environments that cloud fixed, what it had going for it is that you had full control. You control what's on your network. You control every individual device. If some product does not satisfy you, you can rip it out. You can replace it. You can do monitoring everywhere. Like you can do monitoring on your firewalls, on your endpoints. You can just put a tap on the network and just listen to the packets. You have a lot of choices. In the cloud, you don't have any choice, pretty much. Like Henry Ford said, you can have any Ford of any color as long as it's black. So that's essentially the deal with Microsoft Logs. Like you can have any logs there as long as they're produced by Microsoft, which is great if the logging solution is done well, if there are no problems. And not so great if there are issues. And unfortunately, that's the case. And you're at the mercy of Microsoft to fix these issues. You don't have, like, you cannot just say, oh no, I'll just switch to a different vendor. You have to migrate off the Microsoft ecosystem to do that. So you can either raise issues with the vendor or just try to work around them. So what are the log quality expectations? What do I want from logs in the cloud environment? Well, I want an easy-to-consume API. I want a very timely logging of events. I don't want any delays, any noticeable delays there. I want everything to be documented. When I'm staring at the log, I don't want any surprises, any case where I'm looking at some value and I have to hunt through blogs and articles trying to figure out what it is. Everything really should be very clear to the end users. Log records should be complete, like there should be no missing pieces, no empty fields, and every log entry should have the operation that was performed with all parameters, identity information for the user that did it, a very clear IP, like a consistent IP information, geolocation is nice to have, device information that did the action, threat and IP reputation indicators. So all of those, for those of you who are doing incident response, this information is invaluable when you're looking at the logs. And I also want to correlate between logs, because different operations go to different logs at different times from different users. So essentially, we want to know who did what and when, and what else they did, so that we could build connections between those instances and track how the incident progressed, and what did the attackers touch. Unfortunately, those expectations just do not pan out. So let me just go through like a sizable laundry list of things that don't quite go well. So for Microsoft 365, the schema of the log is actually fluid. And what that means is if you have a new operation in there, and it has, let's say, 5 new parameters, those 5 parameters are added as 5 new columns in the log. Just wrap your mind around that. So even log analytics sometimes cannot deal with that. You could have instances where the log is over 500 columns wide, and I've seen errors like that in log analytics. So you can imagine it's kind of hard to consume those kinds of logs in an external CM. You have to kind of pick and choose the fields that you want to see, and you cannot always predict because there are new ones appearing. So it makes it difficult. The better way of doing it would have been to put that complexity in like structures, like JSON structures, for example, and let queries parse individual fields out. But that's not the case, unfortunately. And also, the log APIs, when you pull on them, they're done in such a way that you request specific times between which you want to see records. But because some records arrive late, you either have to live with holes in your logs where there was an event that happened a while ago, and it's just late and you already consumed that part of the log, or you have to kind of consume overlapping chunks of the log and then do record deduplication. And neither of this is ideal. So that's the difficulty you have to deal with. There are sometimes log flow issues. Like there have been a few outages in my memory, including one where we weren't aware that the logs were flowing for several weeks and just discovered it by accident. As you can imagine, like in the cloud environment, when this is your only option, that's a big problem. And nothing really you can do about it other than maybe invest in monitoring your log flow, so some kind of solutions that would track that for you. The other side of this is that logs are enabled in-band. That means that one of the admin users can disable the log, and controls that control that are not, I would say, strong enough. So a pawned administrator could actually disable either all logging and do their stuff, and you'll have no record of it, or they can disable things selectively. Like, for example, you can disable logs from a particular service in Azure. Or in Exchange, you can disable logging for a particular user. So an attacker that wants to be really stealthy, they can do all that. So it may seem that logs are generally flowing, but some parts are missing, and you would never know. So that's, it needs to be just a better protected, privileged operation. And the impact of that is, as defenders, you just have to know about these things, maybe monitor for specific operations in the logs that deal with disabling logs, because that would just turn off the signal and you'll be blind. And if you're on the red team side, consider doing that as a tactic. Like if you get into an environment, disabling the logs may be one of your first orders of business so that you could blind the defenders. And Azure, of course, needs to get a handle on that, essentially. And I'll have these impact slides for most of these issues. There are event delays. So Microsoft advertises that Azure AD logs are up to 3 minutes late. In reality, I found them to be late up to 40 minutes. Microsoft 365 actually gives you no guarantees. And they state that in the documentation. They say that, oh, they may be late 60 to 90 minutes. In reality, like if you look at this graph over here, sorry, not graph, this table over here, so these delays are over 24 hours for some of these events. This is just not sustainable. It hurts defenders. You want to react to things as quickly as possible. But if you factor in, the time spent, these delays, time spent for ingestion into, let's say, your external CM, time it takes the analyst to see the alert and respond to alert, you're almost late by design. And the attackers know about it. They do automation more and more these days. So here, just some examples of what they are currently doing. So they're almost always will be ahead of the curve for this. You'll be catching up to them. There's no way you could monitor and respond to an incident that happens in 10 minutes. And it's a big problem. You need to basically, as a defender, run some stats and see like what are real delays for environments, for events in your environment, and make a decision of whether that's acceptable to you. And for attackers, the big takeaway: use automation. They'll basically never catch up to you. Missing events, that's a fun one. We actually had a back and forth with Microsoft on that one. I gave them specific examples, and they were still unable to track it down. So sometimes you have, let's say, an incident that you investigate. And if you look in different logs and different versions of the log that tracks those events, like sign-in events, these are the three logs I had access to, the beta, the 1.0, and the management activity API. You can see that it's the same kind of activity the user did, but the signal is sometimes very different. Some events are just missing. Sometimes they're slightly different, like some events are logged, others are not. It's a huge mystery. Microsoft couldn't help us figure it out, but what that means is that you're probably missing stuff. Again, defenders, you just need to be aware of it. Maybe build some redundancy into your threat tracking queries. And attackers, just be aware of it. You may get away with doing stuff because there'll be no record of you doing it. There's something called logging tax. Now that's been a problem lately. Microsoft loves to kind of price their security features at different tiers. And the more expensive the tier is, the more security you get. I know they're a business, they have to make money. I think it's not the best approach. In some cases where you're on a budget, you basically have to make a decision. Do I want to be better protected, or do I want to basically save money and stay within my budget? There's certain events that are just not logged unless you purchase a particular tier of service, which is, it's a problem. Like, there's a US Senator, Ron Wyden, said it best, like charging people for premium features necessary not to get hacked. It's like selling a car and then charging extra for seat belts and airbags. I think that just sums it up. It's been a problem lately because there was a breach at Microsoft customers. Some of them were government customers, which is why it kind of raised a big alarm. And actually, as a result of it, Microsoft agreed with CISA to expand access to logging to all customers. So logs that were previously paid for, now all customers would get them, which is awesome. But we'll see how it actually works out in reality, because there were a lot of promises in the past that weren't fulfilled. So Defenders, not much you can do. You can pay extra. You could supplement some of the missing data with third-party information. Like, for example, Microsoft at higher tiers can give you threat indicators in the logs for particular events, but you could, let's say, have an agreement with a third-party data provider and correlate data and say, oh, I have this particular IP. Is it known to be a malicious IP? Is it a VPN? Is it a malicious proxy? Is it a Tor address? So you could try and do some of the things. I don't know where you'll spend more money, this way or by paying Microsoft. And attackers also can take advantage of it, because more expensive tiers are, fewer customers are paying for those. There's less signal. So as a red teamer, you could investigate and see what kind of operations that you're doing would not be available at the lower tier, and maybe prefer that in your tactics. I complained about documentation before. So while the APIs are documented pretty well for the developers, logging documentation is lacking severely. You could just probably get a list of event names that are in the logs, but very frequently no explanation of what individual parameters mean, what individual features and columns mean. And you have to kind of read up on it and do all kinds of investigations to figure it out. Not a lot of people out there have that time to invest to figure it out. Microsoft as a provider is really responsible for giving you full, complete information on it. And there are a lot of data values that I've seen in the past that I just have no idea what they mean. Like, there are certain authentication types that are a mystery, status quotes, operation subtypes, just you name it. And again, like, not much customers can do other than put pressure on Microsoft to kind of improve things. And attackers, again, something to keep in mind. You may figure out that a certain way of accessing the environment is not logged very clearly or gives very cryptic error codes, and maybe that would be your preferred tactic for attacking the environment. Microsoft's environment is very fluid. They have a lot of changes going in and being retired, and unfortunately, sometimes they make, well, actually most of the time, they make changes without properly announcing them. So I'm talking specifically about changes in the logs. Recently, we were investigating passwordless failures in an environment, and we saw an error code that we've never seen before, that seemed very, very unusual, very out of character for this particular sign-in failure, and we had to kind of hunt for information for a while, and I actually did a blog on it explaining how to interpret it properly if you introduce passwordless functionality into your environment, because Microsoft just does not document these things clearly. And what's worse, sometimes things that you depend on just disappear from the logs because Microsoft decided to stop logging them. So 2 examples that I personally had: I was monitoring mailbox login events that just vanished, and my queries just kept not finding anything, and I didn't know about it. So it took a while to actually realize that, oh, we're not seeing these events anymore, and nobody told us. Another issue was that I was monitoring for sign-in attempts where attackers would try to enumerate available users. So they would try different, first name, last name combinations, first name, last name character, those types of combinations to figure out what are the live IDs within the environment. Microsoft used to log that, not anymore. So again, those queries that I had just silently failed, no warning. It's just bizarre. So the biggest problem is that they may take things away and you don't know about it. Again, something to be aware of for the defenders. Maybe some logic to monitor log integrity will help. I'm not sure. Attackers may also kind of investigate this and see if they can take advantage of it in red team engagements. Some events are never logged, and that's Azure is actually a recon paradise. So when you sign in and you start enumerating the environment, like where are the users, what are the services, what are like different blobs that are available, it's all silent. There's nothing in the logs. I actually ran a bunch of attack tools for Microsoft 365 and Azure AD, and most of them leave no trace in the logs. Like you see the sign-in events. You can see events where when they try to, let's say, change a password or like do some change to the environment. But when you're just looking, it's silence. So if you're a red teamer, if you're just looking around, most likely nobody will see anything. That's great. So again, something to be aware of, red teamers. Maybe, well, I mean, you may have to test a few things because things change all the time. Maybe some operations will start to get logged eventually, but at this point, there's just nothing. Now, there are a lot of inconsistencies in data. So if you're tracking specific user ID, for example, and you are using them to correlate signal between different events, different logs, you'll have all kinds of permutations. So you can see that there's a user with all lowercase. In the same log, there's a user with some letters capitalized, same user with ID that's just different. And Microsoft 365 throws a wrench into this by adding, like in Exchange, there are all kinds of different ways to represent a user. So this big text blob is a user ID in the Exchange world. So as you can imagine, trying to correlate all of that is really hard. The user ID could also be named a different field in a conflicting way between different logs. So here's an example here. In one log, it's user principal name. An email-like ID would be called user principal name. In the other log, it would be called user ID. But then in the first log, there is also user ID, but it means something completely different. It means user key. So just trying to make sense of it all is just maddening sometimes. And sometimes Microsoft just says, oh, I have no idea what this user is. So this notice that there is a user key here that's the same user key, but Microsoft says, like I knew, like what was it? A few days ago I knew what that user principal name was, but now I have no idea. That's great. Again, something for essentially, it's going to be a running kind of thread here. Defenders, be aware, maybe work around it. Attackers, maybe something to incorporate into your tactics. IPs are an interesting one. So IPs, they get IPs logged for IPv6 and v4. That's great. But there are all kinds of inconsistencies that I'm seeing. Sometimes IPs are logged with a port number embedded in the IP. So again, if you have automated queries running that matching things by IP, you have to be aware of that and cut off the port number for your query to actually find a match. There are empty IPs, just empty fields. Sometimes they log local and private IPs. Private IPs kind of, like you can debate it. Like I know that you could integrate on-prem with the cloud. Having private IPs may be useful, but I would like public IP to be always available. I've seen all zero IPs, that's very helpful. I've seen IP masks, so here's an example of that. IP address, they decide what to do with that. Some IPs that they log are for Azure infrastructure itself. So you're interacting with some service, and they log a nice record for it, but the IP is not the IP that you're coming from. It's the IP of Microsoft server that you're interacting with. Again, as a defender, incident responder, it doesn't help you at all. Not all IPs can be correlated to sign-in records. That's an important one. So when you're looking for, let's say, certain Exchange malicious activity, let's say somebody created a malicious email rule, you cannot always correlate the IP that attacker is coming from to the IP in a sign-in record, which is kind of a mystery. Maybe attackers are switching proxies, but maybe Microsoft is just inaccurate at logging in. IP reputation, I already mentioned it, sometimes available, but it's subject to logging tags. So again, defenders expect, attackers maybe take advantage. Geolocation, very helpful. Not all attackers are super helpful. I've seen many instances where, let's say, attacker seems to be coming from California, and then they slip up, and there's a Nigerian geolocation that pops up. So you can take advantage of that. Geolocation is useful in incident response, but there are occasionally problems. Sometimes things just break. There was a recent incident where everything was geolocated to Uzbekistan. Okay, that's fine. Sometimes geolocation is empty. I've seen this a lot. So you get the location record, but it's completely useless, as you can see. So as you do monitoring, do not depend too much on it. Attackers are getting smarter. They're using proxies, they're using VPNs, they're using cloud provider IPs, like they could even use Azure, like let's say a free tenant that they got, to host their attack tools to attack. So geolocation may not always help you, but it's a useful tool when it works correctly. Again, like same kind of guidance here. Device information that's logged is also, unfortunately, sometimes hard to deal with. Sometimes they log full user agent. Sometimes they parse it out and not log original user agent. It would be nice to have everything. To have like, what's the original user agent string? What are the what's the operating system that you have determined that it is? What's the browser name and version? Things like that. But it's a mixed bag of things, and sometimes you could get inconsistencies. So, for example, I see a lot of cases where there's some things are Windows, and some things are Windows 10. And if you try to match them up, of course, you have to kind of build some kind of rule table to see that, oh yeah, all of this comes from the Windows environment. Not easy to deal with. I realize that user agents are unreliable, like smart attackers switch them up, but the less sophisticated ones use the original user agents, and that's helpful. Sometimes the actual values in the records could be broken. So this is an interesting example. We were monitoring the set conditional access policy. Like, it's kind of an important operation when somebody tries to change conditional access policy in your environment. And some of our queries were failing. And I just couldn't figure it out. And then I realized that Microsoft just ran out of space. And just put 3 dots in there. And these are not the 3 dots that you click and you get the expanded, the full document. No, these are actually physical 3 dots in the middle of JSON. So of course your JSON parser will fail, and your detection query will not detect anything. So again, I'm sure there's a more graceful way of handling cases like this, but it's just, I don't know, it seems like they don't have an incentive. So again, be aware and maybe do searches rather than JSON parsing in cases where JSON gets really big. So this is all kind of not benign, but this is more on the monitoring side. You may miss some things, but there's nothing dangerous. But there's actually a case that I found that could be pretty dangerous under the right conditions. So there's a pair of problems that currently exists, which is a log pollution plus CSV injection. So for those who don't know, log pollution is a case where you control from the outside what gets logged on the inside in the environment. You could drop malicious payload inside the environment logs. And that can be coupled with CSV injection. CSV injection is an interesting one because CSV files, you'll know, very simple text files, comma separated, seems to be like nothing malicious could be about them. But the fact is that Excel, when you open a CSV file, actually interprets field values as formulas. If there is a formula in the cell, so you could experiment with it yourself. You could create a CSV file and put equals 2 plus 2 in there, and when you open it in Excel, you will see that it will be 4. So it actually actively evaluates values in the cell in the cells of CSV files. So if you put 2 of these together and know that in exchange some of the formulas can actually cause command execution, you can get an interesting exploit, and that's what we saw. And these problems are not new. Like the security researchers, as early as 5 years ago, reported similar attacks in AWS and Azure. So this particular one is a pre-authentication exploit. So you don't need an account on the system. You don't need to exploit an account on the system. You don't need to get in. You just need to know the user principal name of the user you're trying to exploit. And it could be a low-level user, because the idea is to abuse that account to drop something into the logs. And the idea is to try to sign in unsuccessfully with a specially crafted user agent string that will be stored in the logs, and then social engineer the administrator to open that log, and under the right conditions, there'll be command execution. Microsoft did some defenses in Excel recently for that. They have a setting turned on by default that prevents that from happening. However, there are multiple avenues you could take. Like, you could social engineer an admin. You could, pretend to be Microsoft and call them and say, well, hi, we're trying to investigate an incident in your environment. Could you please help us load these logs? And by the way, Excel is just a pain to deal with. Click on this checkbox to see the logs clearly, essentially disabling this defense. There's some, probably a lot of people out there with old versions, not Exchange, Excel. With old Excel versions that are vulnerable to this. There are tools out there like LibreOffice, for example, that also load CSV files, also execute formulas from CSV files, and may be vulnerable to this exploit. So there are multiple kind of ways around this protection in Excel. When I reported to Microsoft, they kind of confirmed it, but they didn't care strongly enough to fix it. So I may as well share with you guys. So this is the walkthrough. This is the attack string that you can try. We're going to try to pop the calculator because we're white hats here. You need a full account name that's valid. That's it. You don't need the password. So you try to sign in as that user with that string as a user agent in your browser. It will fail, of course, because you don't know the real password. However, if you then go to the logs in Log Analytics, export to CSV, open in Excel, under the right conditions, it should pop. And here's the demo. So we start by overriding the user agent. Just plain vanilla Windows box. So in developer tools, there's a field where you could specify a specific user agent. So instead of using the browser default there, you can just enter a custom user agent. So you can just drop it. Then you do an intentional failed login to an existing account. Could be any account in that environment, doesn't matter. So I put just junk as a password. It doesn't matter. It will fail, but the event will be in the logs. It will be in the logs eventually. That's the one of the problems there. And then I basically ask. They go to Log Analytics, ask them to load. It can be they can just open the log. I just create a query here to show you clearly that the payload got into that log field. So you just open it as CSV. You tell the user to just click through these dialogues that everyone ignores, and boom. All right. All right. So just as defenders, be aware of this as a possibility. Train your users to kind of be wary of calls from people trying to social engineer them. For attackers, maybe add this as a tool to your toolbox. You never know. You may find some success with it because Microsoft is not fixing it. So why is this happening? I'm speculating. I don't have any inside knowledge. There could be multiple reasons. I come from software engineering background. I've built products before. I know logging is the last priority, usually. Like your first priority is building features. So this may be the case that they just didn't pay enough attention to it. And when something breaks, that's the first priority for you to fix. Everything else is left till later. So maybe that's why. Microsoft has purchased a lot of products over the years. Maybe these are integration pains where you're trying to kind of wrangle all kinds of products for all kinds of vendors into single architecture, and that's why. Or maybe Microsoft just doesn't have a strong enough incentive to fix that. If customers complain loudly enough, maybe they'll do something. But whatever the reason is, we as defenders are inconvenienced by this, and it just makes our jobs harder. What I think should happen at a minimum, there are a bunch of non-intrusive changes that one can make. Like Microsoft really should do a much better job documenting what they're logging. I don't want to stare at the log and have any question. I should just be able to look in the documentation and have very clear idea what each separate ID is, under what conditions it is logged. It's just common sense. It shouldn't be me trying to figure this out. Log structures and content I think should be treated as an API. Like every time you change an API, it's a big deal. You announce it, you provide backwards compatibility, it's documented. Knowing that this is our only window into what's going in the cloud, I think it's kind of important to keep logs stable because there are a whole bunch of consultants, vendors that depend on the structure of your logs. So I think they should pay attention to that. Logs should be timely. Like delays of hours and days are just not sustainable. You'll perpetually be late. You'll always be cleaning up after an incident instead of stopping it. And then just common sense. Values must be clean, like no weirdness in the logs, essentially. And like another thing on my wish list is to make logs more useful for defenders and incident responders. If there is an IP, maybe give me a reputation for that IP. I want to know if it's part of like known botnet, or if it's was a malicious proxy there. If it's geolocation, just make it useful. Don't have missing geolocation. Like all of these little things that help us just open the logs, connect the dots, and stop the incident. That's the ideal situation. But with so many problems, I suspect the better way is actually full rewrite, but I doubt that will ever happen for that. But interestingly, I looked at other logging in other providers. AWS, I think, has a better system. Like it's more manageable there. It probably has its own problems, but it's more manageable. Octalogs are pretty great. Like I looked at them, they're like Microsoft doesn't compare to that. So anyway, this is just. I think I'm not asking for something unusual here. I think just Microsoft should just react to this. Anyway, so we talked about how logging in the cloud environments is kind of important because you don't have any other way of figuring out what else is going on. I mean, what is going on, what else is going on, like what different users are doing. There's no other ways for you to figure that out. It's by design, but that puts an emphasis on Microsoft having to get this, this right. Since we don't have options to switch to, it's on Microsoft to fix all of these issues and make defenders' life easier. And so for defenders, just know that these things exist. Don't approach migrating to Azure as a walk in the park. There are issues to be aware of, and maybe you develop your queries in such a way that works around some of these issues. Red teamers, maybe some of these techniques can be incorporated in your tactics, and if you do and successful with it, great, and you're not really depending on any 0 days. These are just features of Microsoft's environment that you could take advantage of. Any defender's loss is attacker's gain. And Microsoft, by the way, is there someone from Microsoft here? Oh, no. Okay. All right, so I hope they pay attention. We can only just ask them to fix things. So that's the talk. Slides are, again, this is the QR code for the slides, my contact information. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, let me know. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. No? Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Great job.
All right, thank you.
So here's a small token of appreciation.
Oh, wow, awesome.
This is the official Lagfest token for presentator.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. A lot of things you said, I just saw them, but I was wondering if it's my fault or it's
Exactly.
I have a faulty configuration because this happens. So,
Yeah.
but I'm glad. Well,
Yeah.
kind of glad.
You're not alone. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
are not alone.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
In this. That said, I do have a question. Perhaps you had the opportunity to check that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's two things. Are you familiar with Defender for Identity?
Vaguely. Don't have a lot of experience for that.
So, what is your method for monitoring? What monitoring or sending to Azure logs on-premises AD logs like signings, things like that, or unusual sign-ons on the computers, so not on cloud. Do you have any?
I'm primarily dealing with the cloud stuff. So
Okay.
and for that some of the logs we just look at, like initial research is done in log analytics because that kind of gives you, Microsoft tries to give you kind of good signal in log analytics at least. Once you try to export things to a CM, there could be issues, like some events may be missing. Like I've heard the rumors of Microsoft, for example, backfilling some of the events. So you can imagine a situation where something happens, CM has consumed that time period, and then Microsoft comes back and adds events. CM is already gone, like they're consuming new ones. Microsoft adds records or maybe changes existing records. Even that is possible. So log analytics is probably a better source of truth for you. Like you could look at like the latest data in there. But in my line of work, we do detections for our customers. So we are essentially a CM, sort of. We consume logs from our customers, and we run detection logic over those logs and alert customers of issues. So that's the way we're dealing with the logs.
So again, you focus primarily on cloud stuff. So you don't handle let's say
on-prem, Azure AD on-prem, right? Active Directory on-prem logs.
Okay, so
yes,
even even events from local servers that could be interesting. You don't.
I currently don't do that type of research. We have other people in the company that are dealing with that. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry. Not my area of expertise.
I understand. I understand. Okay. And last thing, with the user agent thing.
Yes.
Because sometimes we do see weird things coming as it's clearly fake. How do you handle this?
Well, there are many different things. So first of all, attackers are not always careful. They're not always. I mean,